interest to you, or come and give a talk. We're always looking for smart people to talk about this stuff. We also, we do occasionally get involved in legislation at the city and state level. We were involved intimately in the conversations at the city about bringing back the automated license plate reader program. We did have an ultimate impact on that, where we got much stronger data retention rules than were originally going to be. So we were very proud of that. Also, we were involved in some discussions at the state recently around HB4, which was the big data privacy omnibus. So yeah, we do a lot of different things. We're very much community driven, so get involved if you want to see us doing something, because that's how it happens. We've also occasionally been known to throw cool cyberpunk parties. If you know any eccentric millionaires, introduce them to me and we can have another one sometime. Anyway, so yeah. We're going to have several wonderful talks tonight. Following me will be my dear friends Dr. Sharon Strover and Dr. Molly Roy, who are going to give us some excellent talks on their research that they do at UT. But yeah, I'm going to be giving you a talk here about a topic that gets in the news quite a bit. I actually first gave this talk to a class of St. Ed's law students back in 2022. You will see slight evidence of the talk's genesis of some of the slides' wording are based around what the conversation was at that time, though I have slightly updated the end of the talk based on recent developments in the last couple years. Yeah, so yeah, all right, we got my first slide up there. Cool. I guess first, a brief show of hands. How many people in this room have even heard of Section 230 of the CDA? And how many of you would actually say you know what it is or what it says? Okay, a decent number. All right, cool. Well, anyway, for those who are completely new to this topic, this talk is going to give you an introduction to what I don't think is an exaggeration to say it is the most important law that governs the internet. And if you've been reading a lot of news and think pieces, you may have gotten the impression that this law is a bad thing, potentially. You will have probably seen critics mostly on the right, but also you'll have seen a decent number on the left who are talking about this law like it's a bad thing. I hope here is to clear up a lot of what I would argue is blatant disinformation around this law. People who are criticizing it literally don't know what it actually says and does, and actually try to convince you that this law is a good thing and it is literally the reason that for all the problems with the internet, it actually enables everything you love about the internet. So, you know, I got a tough bill ahead of me. So yeah, hopefully I will, though, persuade a few of you or educate a few of you by the end of the night. Let's see if I can advance this. Okay, what is the CDA? Well, the CDA is short for the Communications Decency Act of 1996. It was an early attempt by Congress to regulate content on the internet, which is a evergreen topic these days, but specifically, it was an attempt to regulate pornographic content on the internet. So now, to clear up terminology, because I think it's important we first understand what it is, because I'm going to get a little in the weeds legally here, because you know, it's important to understand what the terms actually mean. So the CDA is another name for Title V of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. And Title V specifically was about trying to regulate violent or obscene content on the emerging internet at the time. There was a concern at the time that children and families might be exposed to things on the emerging internet and that there weren't adequate parental safeguards. Now, the CDA, whatever you think about, parental safeguards, the CDA was pretty extreme. It made it a crime to host or share any explicit content, including written content, in any way on the internet that might even, in theory, be seen by a minor, even if it was not the intended audience of the content. Now, as you all understand, the internet, it is very easy to view and share stuff. So if you're somebody who runs a website who wants to make content for consenting legal adults, you can understand such a law would be absolutely terrifying, because it doesn't matter if, well, I didn't intend for children to see this. If any did, even accidentally, you would be under extreme legal liability under this law. ultimately, in a groundbreaking Supreme Court decision, Reno v. ACLU in 1997, the Supreme Court found this law, and I should make clear, unanimously 9-0, found this law was blatantly unconstitutional and denied adults their First Amendment rights to view adult content and consume it if they so chose. So, why are we still talking about the CDA? And what is Section 230? Well, Section 230 is the name, believe it or not, for a particular section of the Communications Act of 1934, which is the law that was the predecessor of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. And for a bit of nerdy trivia, the Communications Act was itself building on an even earlier law, the 1887 Interstate Commerce Act. I give another talk about the history of net neutrality where I go into that a lot more. We will gloss over that for the sake of brevity. So Section 9 of the CDA, also known as Section 509 of the Telecommunications Act, because remember it's Title 5 of the Telecommunications Act, what it did was it updated the existing rules in the 1934 Communications Act. Hence, Section 9 is colloquially referred to as Section 230. So not confusing at all, I know. And I had to myself do a lot of research to fully appreciate these distinctions. Most of the articles talking about Section 230 do not actually explain any of this history. So, Section 230 was actually a late addition to the CDA. It was not in the original bill. It was added by then House Reps Christopher Cox and Ron Wyden. The name Ron Wyden might be familiar to a few of you. He is currently one of the senators from Oregon, and he is my favorite senator in the entire Congress, actually. I love the man. So, and I know I hate most senators, so it's like, wow, I actually can like one of them. So anyway, unlike the portions of the act that regulate adult content, Section 230 was the only part of the law that the Supreme Court said was not unconstitutional. So it's the only part of the law that's still standing. So what is that exactly? What does it say, this law that everybody's arguing about so much? Well, as you might have gathered from the beginning of my talk, it's only 26 words. Specifically, Section 230C1. That's subsection 1. That's Section C, paragraph 1. Thank you. The words say, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Okay, that's short, but also what the hell does that mean? All right. And now the 26 Words Created the Internet is actually the name of a very nice book that goes into the history of this law. So in further resources at the end, it's one of the resources that I recommend you check out if you really want to know a lot more about this. So before the other portions of the CDA were found unconstitutional, Cox and Wyden, basically, they put this in that context. Like, they added Section 230 before the Supreme Court ruled the whole rest of the thing unconstitutional, because they were very worried about the implications of this law. And so what they wanted to add was essentially good Samaritan safeguards to the law that would make it so that people who rehosted, shared, or allowed user-generated content on their websites wouldn't be found in violation for the act for content that other people had created or hosted. The concept actually, when you explain it in simple words, I think makes a lot of sense. The basic idea was only the person who actually broke the law should be criminally liable. In other words, the person who uploaded the illegal content, not the website operator. Now, traditional law around being a publisher of speech, which is usually newspapers before the internet, it was based on the idea that due to editorial discretion, i.e. that people who publish a newspaper decide what to put in it and what to publish, they're liable for any illegal content in the newspaper or whatever they published. But on the internet, this model breaks down when you have websites that allow user-generated content, because there's no way for a website, the publisher, to personally vet millions and millions, and the biggest websites, even billions of items of user-generated content. And no, AI cannot fix this problem, actually. AI can help you at that scale, but the simple fact of the matter is it is at such a scale, there is no way for a website operator to be truly cognizant of everything users have added to their website. It's just literally not possible. All these sites can't exist without the CDA. You might have heard of a few of them. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Pinterest, Twitch, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Meetup, Medium, Discord, Vimeo, Zoom, and you can tell I made this in 2022, Clubhouse, because it was very hot for a brief moment. But yes, any site that lets users share things, not the creator of the website or web page, but lets you, the users, add your content to the website without the shield of Section 230, there is no way for a website operator to run without getting sued out of existence if they're on the hook for the tiny fraction of their users who want to be bad actors and upload illegal or wrong stuff. Now, let's dig in a little more, because you might have known, here's the part that even less people know about Section 230. There's two parts of it, actually. There's a second part, Section 230C2. And this part's very important as well, because the key thing to understand is you may have heard critics of Section 230 say that, oh, well, it's letting these websites just flaunt the law. It's making them immune from accountability. Except that when you take into account the second part, the whole point of the CDA, Section 230, is to incentivize moderation, actually, not to disincentivize it. Because what the second part does is it protects websites and online publishers from liability when they attempt to self-moderate their own content and make good faith efforts at removing illegal content. See, the law is designed to both protect websites when they fail to remove illegal content from being responsible, but also protect them when they do remove content that might not have been illegal, but was removed while the publisher was attempting to remove illegal material. It basically, somebody who's like mad, like you took my content down, it wasn't illegal, they also can't sue the website. It's like, well, I made a mistake, basically. In other words, the law is it's an approach around free speech, community moderation, curation that basically says each website is most capable of deciding for itself what user-generated content it does and doesn't want on its platform. Basically, you can view it as freedom of speech is balanced with freedom of association and a website's right to not host content it doesn't agree with, actually. In fact, some of the criticisms you may even have heard from mostly right-wing sources around Section 230, they get angry when websites actually exercise their right to take content down. So, and I'll dig into a little more of the dynamics of this in a minute here. Yeah, what's my next slide? Yes. You can also tell from that title this was written in 2022 because that's when the phrase cancel culture really started being a thing. But yeah, so basically there's a lot of people who do not like Section 230, and on the right and the left, actually. It receives a lot of ire from both sides wanting to get rid of it, actually. And you know, I often joke, well, if both sides hate a law, it either means it's really bad or it's really good. I think this one's really good, actually. Conservatives don't like Section 230 because they believe it allows websites to remove conservative voices for any reason whatsoever with no legal recourse. On the flip side, liberal voices don't like Section 230 because they don't like the broad moderation power it gives websites that prevents them from doing things like mandating that hate speech be removed from these websites. However, Section 230, I would argue, has become a popular scapegoat for both sides in this debate due to not really understanding what Section 230 is and isn't and what it actually allows and doesn't allow. And so this next bullet point, I really want you to take it to heart. Many activities that websites engage in, such as favoring political viewpoints, allowing content some find offensive, removing posts, indexing search results, aggregating content, negative reviews, fact checks, and more, are all activities protected under the First Amendment, even if Section 230 did not exist. In fact, this is the key point of another resource I link at the end of the talk that's from a wonderful blog called Tech Dirt, which I recommend anybody who cares about tech law issues read. It's run by a lawyer named Mike Masnick, who really is a treasure. But this, he wrote an article and explained about 230, and that's actually, that list right there I basically take from it, where he's clarifying all these things, which you may in certain contexts have issues with, they're not caused by Section 230. They are actually First Amendment protected activities. Now, I'm not claiming Section 230 is perfect, not at all. A lot of what this is about is really just clearing up misconceptions. And you may agree or disagree with me about what I'm going to ultimately suggest are some of the solutions to these problems. But yeah, it's not perfect. You know, a lot of the arguments from the right and occasionally the left don't understand the difference between Section 230 and terms of service versus the First Amendment. And yes, I do personally find it pretty funny that conservatives keep asking the government to regulate private corporations on this issue. That specifically, there was HB 20 in Texas, which is still a political hot potato. Florida has a similar law. Now, it's true, though. The rules around what are bannable offenses on most social media platforms are vague, and they're not consistently enforced. And also, it is true that if you get banned from the social media website of your choice, regardless of how just you think it is or isn't, you can be cut off from your friends, your communities, and literally be forced to recreate your online life. And despite what a lot of people believe, this is not just like right-wing people getting kicked off these sites. Actually, academic studies have shown the left gets kicked off just as much and sometimes even more than the right. They have plenty of what a lot of people would view as extreme unpopular positions as well. And also, because of monopoly consolidation, there's only a few major social media websites, and most of them do not really talk or communicate with each other very well. So if you don't like how a particular website moderates, like maybe you're like, they allow for racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, I don't want to be a part of this, you often can't leave, you know? Because there's only a few choices. And so there's no really ways to punish a platform by saying, I think your moderation is shit, and going somewhere else. And platforms, their utility is related to how many people are on them. You know, basically, you know, if everybody's on Facebook, even if Facebook sucks, you're on Facebook because that's where everybody is. So now, these were some of our proposals around how to fix this stuff, and I will have a final slide. So basically, this is where we were in 2022. I'll have a final slide that I think actually shows that a lot of what we were proposing at the time is actually starting to happen on the internet. So, actually, and so our vice president of the board, Alex Sharastani, put together this little explainer for us in 2022. So, you know, basically, just to read to you, you know, so basically, social media companies, they thrive on connection, the network effect. If you leave a social media site, it means losing your network. And leaving a particular platform, it should not be a 21st century exile from society. Companies should permit users to carry their profiles and communities with them. Because right now, users don't really have bargaining power with these platforms because there's not a lot of competition. And it should be clear that this is not just frivolous, like internet edgelords angry. Governments, emergency services, schools, and even presidents communicate with their communities via social media. Everyone should have a way to access these communications without accepting a particular platform's business practices. And basically, there's actually a technology you all use that already solves a lot of these problems. It's called email. It turns out you can easily communicate with anyone who uses email, regardless of what their email provider is. And we think this is how social media should work, actually. And yeah, and so some of the things we proposed around in 2022, what we were thinking should happen here, is essentially kind of a social media API, which that's a programmer term, but to explain it basically, it's basically the idea that what should happen is that social media websites should have a standard means by which users can export their information from one social media site and import it into another. In other words, we need laws that say, like, I want to leave Facebook. I should be able to export all my stuff, import it into something like TikTok or something, and then basically I should actually still be able to communicate with my friends on Facebook, even though I'm now on TikTok. Yeah, you know, I can provide this slide. Anybody who wants to read more, I don't want to take up too much time, particularly just because I want to get to a lot of the things we talked about here have actually, in the last few years, are really actually starting to happen because there's now a thing called the Fediverse. So what is the Fediverse? Well, the Fediverse basically creates kind of a social media API. It uses a technology, a protocol called ActivityPub, which basically makes it where you, much like email, can communicate with people on different social media sites and servers than the one your account is actually on. And there are now a whole bunch of decentralized federated social media services that replace these centralized services. If you're very pissed, like many of us, at Twitter's current moderation, there's a wonderful service called Mastodon I suggest you check out. You don't like Facebook? There's an alternative called Friendica. You don't like Reddit? There's an alternative called Lemmy. YouTube, PeerTube, WordPress, Micro.blog. The developer of Micro.blog lives here in Austin. I know him. He's a great guy. Instagram, PixelFed. So, yeah. Basically, it seems like a lot of people are starting to realize that, yes, this is the direction social media, I think, needs to move in, basically. An idea of that, the way I keep trying to put it is like, the way I put it is, people should not interfere with your desire to communicate with who you want to communicate with, but also nobody should get in the way of your right to not communicate with anyone you don't want to communicate with. Section 230 enables communities to decide their own rules of conduct and what is and isn't acceptable speech within those communities. The problem is monopoly consolidation around the few places we can speak. And so I really hope more technological solutions that get that Section 230 is a good idea and we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that we can fix the legitimate problems of modern social media without removing what I think basically allows all of us to actually be able to share the wonderful things we all create and think with each other with, a technology that, despite all its problems, I still think is one of the most miraculous things we've ever created. You want to learn more? That Tech Dirt article right there is a lot of the inspiration for this talk. There's also an EFF blog. It's not Section 230 President Trump hates, it's the First Amendment. So I suggest you check that out. And also, Cornell's Law Department has the text of Section 230 if you'd actually like to not take anyone else's word for it and read it yourself. I know, what a concept. Yeah, that's what I had. Anybody got any questions?
All right, thank you. Fantastic. All right, we're going to go to the audience. And let me see if there's any hands raised. I don't see anybody.
What you got for me, Andrew?
Good talk, Kevin. Fediverse, nice idea. They're bad people in the world, Putin, others, who really are injecting really, really ugly text into the world and attempting to make this a very unpleasant space.
Don't disagree.
What do we do about it?
Well, I mean, I won't pretend I have all the answers to that, certainly. But, part of why I actually am a big fan of Section 230 and this approach is that it's an approach that specifically says, I don't have to have all the answers for everyone. It basically lets, maybe what I think is offensive is not offensive to somebody else. Maybe what I think is dangerous isn't. It's really an approach that says, if I want to make a community based around these values, these principles, where I don't want hate speech in my community, and personally I don't, like no community I moderate will that be a value. But, I mean, I guess what I'll say is that, we don't have free speech because all speech is good. Some speech is actually dangerous. Some speech is false. To quote George Carlin, if speech, he says like, oh, it's baloney speech isn't dangerous, that words can't hurt. Nobody'd ever try to ban speech if that wasn't true, actually. Yeah, some speech is dangerous. But, at the end of the day, it's trade-offs living in a free society. Like one thing I think some people, in the recent TikTok debate may not understand is that the Supreme Court actually in the 1960s found you have a First Amendment right to hear foreign propaganda, actually, because the government can't make that decision for you, actually. So I ultimately, maybe you might think I'm naive, but I ultimately actually believe in people's power to find the truth for themselves. But I'm willing to be proven wrong on that. I tend to ultimately believe that people can achieve great things if we let them.
Hi there. Hey, thanks. Great talk.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if you wanted to weigh in on Net Choice v. Paxton and maybe help understand what the issues at stake are there a little bit and how you think that's going to break down.
Net Choice v. Paxton, sure. I mean, yes. HB 20, which I alluded to briefly, is the Texas law at the heart of Net Choice v. Paxton. So first of all, me and the National EFF, we think HB 20 is unconstitutional. Is the government trying to tell a private business what speech they can and cannot have on their platform? Because, I mean, for instance, if you want to know things that actually would run afoul of HB 20, let's say you're a social media website, and I guess slight trigger warning because I'm not going to get too dark here, but this has been something that's come up in some of the discussions. You know, unfortunately, sometimes when mass shooting events happen, sometimes the shooters will try to live stream what they're doing on these websites. HB 20 would actually make it illegal for a social media website to kick that stream off the website, actually, because it says, oh, well, that's his political point of view. You know, you can't remove that. So I personally think that's disgusting. But that a website would be told you can't take that down. So I think it's blatantly unconstitutional. As far as how I think it's going to go with this Supreme Court, I'd like to say they'd see it's obviously unconstitutional. I don't know what's going to ultimately happen. I hope they find it's unconstitutional because ultimately, you know, websites at the end of the day, they are, you know, you don't have to agree with what a website says, but I think it's very dangerous if you make the government say what a website must says. Like, imagine, pick whatever viewpoint you find vile and wouldn't want to be associated with, and imagine you run a server and are told, oh, you have to keep that Nazi content up because that's a political viewpoint. You're discriminating. So, yeah, I hope they find it unconstitutional, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Am I correct in my understanding that a predecessor of all this was the InfoSex case here in Austin, that Austin Community Television ran a graphic gay sex clip ostensibly for AIDS education. I note it was interracial. The group sued immediately. It was determined that the city of Austin was not responsible. The cable corporation, a big group, was not responsible, and not even the cable access group that produces or allows for the cable access programming, but in fact it was the producer solely who was responsible for the content. Is that a precedent for this? Thank you.
I mean, that is a wonderful question. I will actually plead, and I'm feeling vaguely embarrassed considering it all happened here in Austin. I actually don't know much about that case at all, so I can't actually give you an informed opinion, and I don't believe in speaking off the cuff about things I'm not informed to give a good answer on. I'd be happy to talk to you about this more after the talk because it does sound very relevant to this stuff, and I do know that many of these debates, they did play out in the 70s and 80s and 90s on public access because it is this weird space of it's government owned, but also it's private people making statements. Who's responsible for the speech? There is a lot of nitty gritty you can get into there. Yeah, I mean, there's interesting legal precedents around this stuff. I guess I can just say that, like, there have even been times. There's actually a 1946 Supreme Court case, I forget the name, where the Supreme Court has actually ruled that sometimes even if a space is privately owned, if it's being used for enough public official business, that actually the First Amendment starts applying to the space. Though this was mostly around physical gathering places, there's not been a lot of jurisprudence I'm aware of around this in digital spaces. Yeah, the line between public and private on this stuff gets interesting. And I guess I'll just also add, some people talk about, well, why don't we, make the internet owned by the government, public instead of private? And I'm just like, oh, people mad about Section 230, I think it'd be even angrier because turns out, people who say, oh, well, they can't kick this content off these websites because it violates the First Amendment. It's like, no, it doesn't, because First Amendment only restricts what the government can do. Suddenly, if the government is running the internet, First Amendment does apply. And a bunch of stuff that most people maybe you're fine with being on the internet, but don't necessarily want on their website, it's legal under the First Amendment. Couldn't ban any adult content. Turns out spam is legal under the First Amendment. Turns out bots are legal under the First Amendment. So for people who propose, let's have the government run it, it'll fix everything, I think people will actually be angrier if we do that. I know you.
How are you doing today?
How's it going, Stas? What do you got for me?
All good. Yeah, right. A question. So I really appreciate everything you do, guys, even though we often have very opposing opinions. However,
Well, they're intelligent opposing opinions, so thank you for that.
looking forward to that. On the bright side of that, I am on the receiving side of that. So I've been working with big consulting companies, and I'm right now working with a major vendor.
Yeah.
And what I see with all the efforts that the society is trying to put some guardrails around, like how certain liberties can be either not restricted or protected.
Right.
And you put a law into that, and a bunch of folks immediately put lots of lawyers with six-figure salaries to work that around. And then you put more guardrails, and then more loopholes comes up, and then we end up with something like the modern IRS code, which is like incomprehensible, unfathomable.
And we all know that nobody abuses the IRS code. It's very, very hard to abuse that.
Really? So, right, would it be easier to simply say, like, yeah, we have the First Amendment and the speech is not restricted no matter what. Yes, adult content, yes, spam and everything else, but this is not what the government can do, period, end of story, and then the private companies can deal with that if they really want to.
Well, I mean, then you like Section 230 because it actually, note, it's 26 words, and it's actually, that is kind of its approach, basically. It sort of says, who knows best what the speech on this community should be? The community and those who run it. Now, monopoly is a different problem, and I suspect you and I would probably disagree about the solutions to monopoly because I'm a dirty leftist. But yeah, I would argue then Section 230 actually, a lot of its power is its simplicity. It is not a 90,000-page IRS code. Any more questions?
Hello. Thank you for your talk. Really appreciated that. One, I don't know how to put this, discrepancy I noticed is that much of your talk focused on how we interact with each other. You know, I could send you a message on social media, show you a picture of my dog, etc.
Yeah.
However, most of at least the kind of bigger companies have a publishing step in terms of the algorithm that determines what appears in your feed.
Right.
You know, if I go on, if I search for, oh goodness me, I don't know, beer. I search for beer, then funnily enough, soon enough, my Facebook feed has beer advertisements in it.
Right.
Is there not a publishing step there? So how do we reconcile interpersonal communication with the publishing decision, at least in my opinion, it's a publishing decision made by these major websites to show you what you actually see? These aren't the same things.
Man, I got a good crowd. So many good questions. Well, I guess what my first question would be, I am certainly no fan of opaque, biased algorithms. I personally think, not everybody in the digital liberty community agrees with me, I personally think that websites should be actually required to allow users to upload their own user-generated algorithms, actually, and that this should be mandated by law. I should be able on Facebook to upload any feed rule I want, and it will curate my posts however I want, actually. This would be terrible for their business model, so it will never happen, but I think I should have that right. I hear you about it gets, you know, some of my friends who are tech lawyers could maybe speak a little, I'm just a programmer who knows a lot about this stuff. Some of my friends who are tech lawyers could probably speak a little more of the nitty gritty of what counts as publishing and what doesn't. I guess just I might leave you with a little bit of a thought that, you know, I guess my question would be, is it possible for an information service to present you content without making some kind of editorial decision? Even returning results alphabetically or chronologically is technically a curation moderation decision. It is still a choice around what's being presented to me first based on my search. And I would actually put it to you, there is no way for your search to return you results without a choice being made about what to prioritize. At the end of the day, I type in something to Google, and my first page of results will be based on a choice they made, an algorithm. Now, I'm not saying that some choices they make couldn't be less biased than other choices, but there's no way not to ultimately decide, I'm going to show him these 10 pages as the top results. So I would put it to you, is there any way to not make a publishing decision for an information service in that context? You can follow up if you have thoughts on that.
Last question. All right, who has the best question in the room? Are you sure? It's going to be really good question.
We've had some very good questions.
We have. It's been a great audience.
I was going to save this because I thought maybe you were an attorney, not a programmer, but I heard that last comment. So,
well, I can fake it sometimes, so try me.
What I kept thinking of toward the end of your talk was, what about identity? Because part of the thing that sucks about email is phishing, and since there's no centralized identity, service or something, it's easy to just say, this is my email address I just made up. And I was wondering the same thing when you were talking about being able to go from service to service and bring with you your social network and your identity. It sort of implies some sort of way of proving, like, this is my identity and not one that I picked up, stole from someone else, created, etc. How do you think about that stuff?
I mean, that's a good question. And of course, identity verification can run headlong into another value I'm a fan of on the internet, which is the right to privacy. It can be hard to prove who you are and also still be anonymous, though there are certain technical solutions to this. There's a thing called zero trust proofs, which actually are a way mathematically you can verify who you are without actually revealing who you are. So there are certain technical solutions to some of these problems. I mean, and this actually does, I will admit, once again, tech lawyers should speak to this more, but this does get into one of the potential downsides of a solution like the Fediverse, which is, remember, despite what many people argue, Section 230 does not mean websites cannot be sued. There are certainly still plenty of ways they can break the law and be sued. And actually, if you heard my talk and are just like, I'm going to go out and start my own Mastodon server, I'm like, maybe don't actually. And I know that sounds weird given I just gave you that talk, but you actually do assume some legal liability actually when you run your own server. And there actually already have been some cases of people running private Mastodon servers who got raided by the police for actions of some of their users on their servers. I would say if you are thinking about getting involved, it is important to have some good, solid legal advice. And I guess what I'll also say is this is actually, believe it or not, this is why trust and safety teams are important, actually. I know we have a certain eccentric billionaire who lives here in Austin who loves to shit-talk trust and safety and claim it's just censorship, but actually they perform a vital service, and one thing they do is prevent people who are being fraudulent and trying to fake other people's identities. So, I mean, I guess I would say it is one of the weak points of this approach, and we may have to get creative in certain solutions. I guess I just will say that there are ways to build in mathematically forms of private identity verification, and they probably need to be part of, and probably some of them already are. I'm not an expert on how ActivityPub works, but I would not be surprised if some of the export-import rules already do certain things to ensure when an account is transferred that there is some integrity, that the person transferring it has permission to do so. So it's a problem. It's a good question, but I do think there are some ways we can surmount it, just like we do with email, imperfectly, but I'm not claiming any of this is perfect. I mean, there's going to still be terrible people on the internet none of us like, and we do need to minimize the harm from those people. But I don't want to minimize that harm while harming innocent people who are just trying to express themselves and form community together.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.